Even if we keep in mind that none of us can predict the future, it's also important to make sure that we're not fighting the last war. So, Adam, let me ask you, as you see it, what's the difference between 2020 and 2016? Or are the two races more similar than we realize?
Well, not to, really oversimplify things here and state the obvious, but the main reason 2020 is so different from 2016 is that Donald Trump is the incumbent president in this race. And yet he is basically trying to rerun the same campaign that he did in 2016, right? But he can no longer be the sort of anti-establishment challenger figure when you're an incumbent president and you actually have a record from the last 4 years to run on. And that record that he's trying to defend is overwhelmingly viewed negatively by the public, right? I mean, he's underwater on his handling with the coronavirus pandemic, with the, even his numbers on the economy are starting to sour, on healthcare, on race relations, basically any topic that is top of mind for the American public right now. They are not approving of the way he is handling things. So that's obviously, not to state the obvious, a major difference here from 4 years ago. Another, Joe Biden, he's not Hillary Clinton. He is generally more well-liked. He's winning the majority of voters right now who both dislike him and Trump. That's a big shift from 2016 when Trump was winning a lot of that group of voters between him and Clinton. He doesn't have any sort of kind of big, scandal dogging him. Obviously that email story, trailed Hillary Clinton throughout the entirety of the race. And obviously is kind of what ended up turning things at the very end there with James Comey. Another big difference, Joe Biden is uniting the Democratic Party much more quickly and more effectively than Hillary Clinton was able to in 2016. So you kind of take all these things together. Right now, the race is shaping up as a referendum right now on the president's performance, specifically lately his handling of the coronavirus as cases are beginning to surge once again. These are all issues that have, affected basically every American's life at this point for the next 4 months and will continue to through November and beyond. You layer that in with sort of the negative performance reviews on a lot of other issues. Joe Biden being in a much different place than Hillary Clinton was 4 years ago. That's why he's jumped out to this big lead in the polls. Now, that's not to say, that the race isn't going to tighten. I don't think most Democrats think that Joe Biden is going to win Pennsylvania by 13 points or that he's really going to win the popular vote by 15 points. That's what some polls out this week are suggesting. But, just kind of comes back to that Trump is trying to run basically the same campaign that as he did in 2016 amid a very different set of circumstances. And even 4 years ago, that barely worked for him. So, again, things can change. But right now, basically, no matter what way you slice it, things aren't great for Trump. And presidential races usually come down to the fundamentals. And basically everything is pointing in the direction of Joe Biden right now.
Murph, any room for disagreement there?
Not really. I think the biggest factor, and Adam hit on it, is that Joe Biden is not Hillary Clinton. He is not, even though he's been in the public eye for decades, he's not been rightly or wrongly, subject to blistering attacks from the right wing, from Republicans and even some Democrats that have, Donald Trump had the fortune or misfortune, I guess, of running against one of the few politicians in the country that was as unpopular as he was. And as Adam May mentioned, the people who disliked both Clinton and Trump tended to go with Trump. We'll take the new guy. We'll see what the businessman can do. I think Trump is very geared up to run a race against someone as disliked as Hillary Clinton, someone he can easily tag with crooked, and the fact that the news just kept coming out in 2016, indicating that maybe there was something nefarious about what Hillary Clinton had done with her emails. I mean, obviously the hacking situation with the DNC, I think conflated all of those email stories together, and made it seem even larger than the actual story was. Biden, for his faults, and I'm sure we'll get to those later, is not as despised as Hillary Clinton was. He's not as unlikable as she was running up to that election. And so now Trump is going to have to sink or swim sort of on his likability factor. He doesn't have the fact that his opponent is equally unliked by the public. And again, this is based on polls, not personal opinion. And so I think that's really the difference. And I also think one of the things is that Trump has geared up, and the entire Republican Party had sort of geared up to run this race against Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or someone that could be easily tagged as a socialist. Joe Biden, for his faults, among Democrats, I don't think any Democrat would say that Joe Biden is a socialist. So I think it's harder for that. And I'm not sure that the Trump campaign has been able to pivot quite so quickly. If they were running against Elizabeth Warren, I think they had a better blueprint to do that.
Well, let me ask you guys, because I think the public, by and large, if they heard this conversation, their first response would be, okay, but Biden was up in the polls. Biden is up in the polls now, but so was Hillary, wasn't she? I mean, and if Hillary was able to lose her lead, can't the same happen to Biden, or can't the polls also be wrong about Joe Biden? Adam, I'm not sure though it's that simple.
No, it's not. And yeah, I think that's one of the lessons you need to take away from 2016 is that you can't place all of your faith in the polls. But I think it also is worth pointing out that Joe Biden is in a much different position polling wise at this stage in the race than Hillary Clinton was 4 years ago, both in terms of he does just have a much larger lead that is well outside the margin of error. I referenced, there was a Quinnipiac poll yesterday that showed Biden up 15 points nationally. There was an NBC Wall Street Journal poll that showed him up 11. And, if you look back and, any of the kind of polling average sites that are out there, Real Clear Politics, 538, you can go back and look at where Clinton and Trump were in the polls in 2016. The race was actually a lot closer than you might remember. Hillary, of course, still in the lead, but in a lot of cases, mid-single digits, if not lower single digits. And another key difference is that Joe Biden, in basically all of these national and battleground state polls now is approaching 50, at 50, or over 50, right? So he's getting a majority of voters, which is another huge difference from where the polling was in 2016, where even when Clinton was up, she was really only in the low or mid 40s. Clearly, there was a bigger kind of pocket of voters who were out there who didn't like either candidate and were going to kind of wait until a little bit later on in the race. Or, critically, I think this has kind of been something that's been a little overlooked, maybe looking third party. There really isn't that, Gary Johnson or Jill Stein that's going to be on the ballot this time around that could siphon some of those votes. And I think you guys touched on Kanye West a little bit last week, but we don't need to get into him as any sort of serious contender to even play spoiler here. So that's another huge difference when Joe Biden already at this point in the race, a little less than 4 months to go before November, getting that majority of voters is huge. So the question becomes, maybe Trump can up his numbers a little bit from the high 30s, low 40s, but how does he drive Joe Biden's numbers down? And at least as of right now, they haven't found an effective way to do that.
Well, I looked at some of those polls, and the Real Clear Politics average, Clinton led by 11 points in March of 2016, but by May, Trump had actually taken the lead in those polls, and then it stayed within 5 or 6 points, including Trump grabbing a little bit of a lead in July again, in mid-October. And I think this is what the public that says don't trust the polls will point to. In mid-October, it was Clinton by 8. And so obviously we know everything that happened after mid-October with the letter from James Comey. And so that if you're looking for a bright side to these polls being similar to the polls that you saw in 2016, I think you would point to that as late as the middle of October, Clinton's Real Clear Politics average lead was 8 points. And obviously she ended up winning by somewhere between 2 and 3 points in the popular vote, right. Certainly not in the Electoral College vote. But Biden's lead, to Adam's point, has just been much more consistent and
growing.
And his ceiling has been higher.
Yeah, absolutely.
The wild fluctuations that there were in 2016.